All right, everybody, welcome to Shelf Space. This is episode 13. We're in the 2019 second episode, and as always, we've got Gina live from Toronto, up
Hello.
above me there.
Hey,
We've got
Gina.
Hello.
myself out in Edmonton here, and we have a special guest with Charles in Montreal. We have Mr. David Giraud,
Hello.
artist
David.
in.
Wrong hand. Can't see my
Yeah,
other
there,
hand.
there we go. So David's a very experienced artist and sculptor in the statue industry. Been around a long time, worked on a lot of stuff. So we're going to pick his brain a little bit here today. We're going to do a live review of the XM Darth Maul and go through some of his projects with Sideshow, DC Direct, Figurama, and some upcoming projects of his. So Charles, introduce us all
right.
to David.
Well, this is David Giraud. He's a veteran in the field for over 20 years, 21 years, if I'm correct.
Well, the 21 years mostly like video games. Like I really started doing collectible in 2008, so it's been about 10 years collectible. A bit more than 10 years in collectible, and the rest was mostly video games. Still doing that
Oh,
today.
great stuff. Well, from what I understand, you were born in the outskirts of Paris and you came down to Montreal, Canada.
Born in
about-
Paris, actually.
Born in Paris.
Yeah, living
And-
in the outskirts of
All
Paris.
right. And then you came to Montreal about 30 years ago, we would say.
Well, a bit less than that, 91. Yeah.
So how did you fall into the field of digital sculpting? How did you come into this business?
Well, like a lot of artists, I guess, like I was drawing and I was always drawn to art. So like that's like super classic story. Like everybody's saying the same stuff,
Sure,
comic books.
you
And
love the stuff as a kid and you
Of
want to
course.
do it as a grown-up.
of course, so like superheroes, like we were talking a bit earlier. One of my cousins gave me a big box of Marvel comics. And even though I don't know like all the covers, like I was reading those like from the 60s. So he had this collection of
Silver Age
collectible,
Marvel.
from the 60s, and it was different format because in France it was called Spatial Strange, and they had like, instead of being just one comic, they had a collection of comics every month. So you would buy it, and
we had that here too.
you would have the translated comic
It
books.
was black and white too, right?
Some of them were, and some of them were full color. So that was and like all the European comic books, the bande dessinée as they call it. So
So one of the things that the first projects you did for Sideshow was a Snake Eyes.
yeah,
right?
Snake Eyes versus Red Ninjas.
Red Ninja. How did that come about? How did they notice you? How did they find you?
They didn't.
They didn't find you?
No, Adam Ross, which he had his company back then.
Adam Ross, just as we're name dropping here, Adam Ross is the one who worked on the XM Ghost Rider and the XM Punisher.
Yeah, among
Right? So-
among others.
Among
Phoenix.
others. So he's
The
been
first Phoenix
around-
as well.
He's been at first Phoenix, so he's
Yeah.
been around for quite some time as well.
And he's done a lot of pieces for Sideshow, and so it was basically well, he had his own company and he was contracted by Sideshow. I think I'm not sure about all the details, but
There you
basically I met him in Montreal. He was still doing some stuff for McFarlane, if I remember well. And
The action figures.
yeah, he was doing that
Oh,
at
wow.
some point. And so he had a conference in Montreal, and I was there, and I went to meet him at the end. I was like,
You stalked him.
if a little bit, I was like, if you have something for me, like this is. I don't think I had a card or whatever. I don't know what I had, if I had a portfolio.
You had
but
email will travel.
something like that. But it was pretty generous with his time, and gave me a chance. But I actually I think I was supposed to do the Red Ninjas, and I went
Overboard.
I went overboard because I didn't know I wasn't supposed to do the Snake Eyes. So at one point I'm just showing the stuff that I've been doing. It's like, oh, Snake Eyes is there, and I'm like, yeah, but not supposed to be the case. Like, no, but it's fine.
Good stuff. So he was impressed. And next thing you know, Sideshow went with it.
Yeah, I mean, apparently, like the background was not conceptualized at the time, so like it was this whole Japanese temple. It was a very rough sketch, and then yeah, that was fun. Like I learned a lot from that because, like I was saying to Charles, I was used to doing video games, so we did the high res for video games low res and mapping coordinates and all that stuff, textures. But in that case, usually you do a T stance, which is like very stiff. It's not a pose; it's really just to put the skeleton in. So like when we do video games, we mostly use not to pose characters. So like when I did that first statue, I did just what I knew, which was basically unposed. So then I realized I had to pose it, and I had to kind of destroy everything that I did, all the fold, all the clothing, everything had to be kind of redone in the proper position. Especially had like all this gear and those elbow.
Well, his uniform.
His uniform, but it's got those knee pads. And like I very quickly I noticed that, I mean, when you have a knee pad like that and you bend your knee that much, there's nothing that remains from behind. And so like all those things I learned like the hard way. So it's like almost doing double the work, but I learned from that.
To be fair, like when you were starting to do this, like, I mean, digital sculpting was still in its embryonic stage, which kind of leads to the next question we all wanted to ask you is, you've been in the industry, you say, you started in video games and eventually went into collectibles. How much have you seen the industry evolve in all this time? And how have you kept up with the evolution?
So there's the collectible industry, there's also the video game industry. They both changed enormously. So what made a big change in those industry, even movies, is the arrival of ZBrush and sculpt-based digital programs. Before that, we had to do everything into like 3ds Max or like Maya or different software.
Or even traditional with your hands.
Well, yeah, traditional, of course, but like for video game, it was impossible to do traditional. So we're not asked to do traditional. So when I was doing traditional stuff, it was in my free time. It was more like for practice, for fun. So when ZBrush arrived, there was just a game changer, basically. So from there, I remember like some of the, like, I was not a collector, still not really a collector. I have a few pieces, but I'm not really a collector. I like to work on them, but I can't commit that much.
You're a fan of the art. I mean,
yeah, I'm a fan of the art. I enjoy it, but
you don't have to direct and write movies to be a fan of movies.
Oh, for sure.
So, Gina, did you have a question that you wanted to ask?
Yeah. So David, the Snake Eyes and Ninja, that was done using ZBrush.
Yeah.
And that 100%. Was 100%. And then that was your first sort of foray into collectibles? I mean, you were doing video games before that? That was your very first?
That was the first commercial project.
The big name.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I did some statues. I was working in Denmark for a little while, and at IO Interactive, so we worked on Hitman, and it was pretty much Hitman. They had another title at some point, but I remember like there was a conference back then, and among the people that were presenting, there was this company that was actually 3D print company, and it was mostly used back then for inverse engineering, engineering in general, and so they had a few pieces that was not necessarily crazy, but I saw the potential there. So like very quickly from the characters from the game on Hitman, I wanted to do like prototyping with those guys, and like the machines were super expensive, and it was like a very long process compared to like now, like almost everybody. I mean, it's still like a tedious process to make a super clean piece, but it's something that's more affordable now. Like back then, was like pretty much unheard of. I mean, there was some machines, of course, but I mean, in the field of collectible, it was just not something that was very used.
Are you finding, it's great, are you finding that there is a difference working in the collectibles community and in the gaming community?
Well,
there is some overlap, but it's not always the same fan base. And I just wonder if
like fan base, yeah.
If you feel a different kind of pressure when you're doing something collectibles based.
I guess the collectible is there's a lot of pressure because like the collectors can be pretty rough, and
you don't say.
And for good reason.
So nice.
Do you mean like online or the comments or the feedback?
Yeah, online can be pretty rough, but I mean they're pretty passionate, and they pay for what they love, and they want perfection, which is understood. But what's heartbreaking for us is like when we do a piece and we don't control like the final output. So sometimes like even we see some pieces and we're like, oh, the paint, or oh, the light, or that angle of that photo is heartbreaking. We just every time that we see the statues, the first time they release it, we just pray that we're gonna have like a proper photo shoot with some proper lighting.
Yeah, absolutely. The photos mean everything. I mean, you could have a great statue. You could take one of the most popular and well-accepted statues, and under bad photography and bad lighting, it just doesn't showcase what it is. Just to jump back really quickly about ZBrush. Would you consider yourself self-taught in ZBrush? Was it something that you just sort of
Well, back then there was really nothing on the net. I mean, when I adapted ZBrush, it was not the 1.0. It was like it was about to be 2.0, but the versions previous to that were not at the same level at all. They were almost unworkable. Like when I started to play around with like 1.4 or 1.5, I think it was just nothing to do with what we had with 2.0. Like 2.0. I remember seeing some experimentation actually some beta that was done on Lord of the Ring, the second movie. There was some assets that were done in ZBrush, the beta, and when I saw like the digital assets for that movie, I was like, okay, I don't have the program yet, but what I did is I was in Denmark actually back then, working on Hitman. Was not Blood Money. Blood Money started before that, but we went back to another version. We actually did a Hitman contracts. We're on Hitman contracts, and I knew I wanted to have the software from day one. So it was not something I had access to, but I pre-ordered like the program for myself and my team. We're a small team of about 3 to 4 people, I think. Mm-hmm. And it was a small team at first, but then I knew like normal maps in video games were like almost non-existent. It was only Far Cry, the first one, like Crytek, that was actually creating some tools for video games. But I knew we were on the edge of going with those, like sculpted assets that for characters. So I wanted it so bad just to change like the whole work environment, that I pre-ordered all that. We learned some pretty archaic tools from back then, but we started to make some prototype early on for the video game, and we had really great programmers that really helped us to implement some of the code that was non-existent. So like very early on, we had I knew I wanted to change the whole pipeline. So
the industry was changing. The industry was turning upside down. It was like moving on from traditional to digital. And I remember when, for example, Bowen, right? He was one of the first to really make the full transition from what was once all traditional to then all or almost all digital. And, there were some growing pains, right? Mm-hmm. There were growing pains in the sense that for the longest while, like, the first bunch of statues, that came out of digital had this cookie cutter approach, the one leg up. They all kind of started to look the same. And you start to realize that, wow, they're still in the embryonic stage of digital sculpting. You've got to find a way to be more dynamic. And, I think that this would be a good opportunity to just kind of talk about what one of the main reasons why we're here is the Darth Maul. And the Darth Maul is like an excellent example of how much digital sculpting has evolved over the last 10 years.
I think there's two things. Like the software has really evolved, and then also like the artists, like the approach has been very different. A lot of traditional artists have been going into digital, so like we have more of a traditional approach now in digital than we used to have. So I think the fact that traditional sculptors started to do also digital and seeing the quality from like it's very hard, like when you do digital, that you don't have the actual material in front of you. You have nothing. Like the Darth Maul is the first time I see it today. I've seen it on my screen for months, but it's the first time I see it for real.
Right in front of you.
So I mean, I knew what it looked like, obviously.
Right.
But I didn't know what it looked like at the same time.
Chris.
Yeah. Well,
go ahead.
Sorry, before we move on to Darth Maul, I wanted to quickly about the snake eyes. I saw that statue in San Diego in 2010. I think it made its debut there or early on. And so it was one of the statues that sucked me into this hobby. I wasn't collecting statues at that
Sorry,
time.
it's a good thing.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
good thing.
It's
Sorry
a good
about that.
thing. It's a good thing. Well, good and bad, right? But yeah. So I remember walking through Sideshow's booth. I saw that one. I spent a long time looking at it, and it was one of the ones that I first saw and sucked me in. So before we move on to Darth Maul, I just want to show this one of your personal projects here. This one's called Phobos.
The goddess.
Yep.
So if you want to just tell us a little bit about this character and what she means to you and what.
So ultimately, what I really want is just to create my own collection. But the problem with that is you need to work really hard on something that nobody knows, and sell something that nobody knows. I mean, I know some companies that I really love. They're doing their own IP. They're doing their own things. It's a very small number of things. The problem, well, when I started to do that, it was for a contest. It was a Mass Effect contest, and I went probably totally, like, I was probably off the subject completely. Like there was basically a more medieval one that was for Dragon Age, and one that was sci-fi. And that one, believe it or not, was my sci-fi approach.
I think it looks great though.
So the idea for me was like I just went to have an occasion to do something outside of work, and like when you do full-time work, and like you don't necessarily have the motivation to do a lot of personal work. I mean, I was always pushing myself to do that, but the fact that I had a contest was kind of, okay, I have that much amount, I get this amount of time to actually do something, and I will just try to focus to get the final version. So for me, it was more like, I don't really care so much about the contest winning or losing. I mean, there's no losing there. I just want to do something for myself. And the idea was to create like a full piece, not just like a boss or something that would spend a few hours on it, and just really trying to think, what if it was going to become a statue? So that was kind of the frame of mind, was just, I want to create my own statues. I don't really have time to create the statues outside of work or outside of my contract work. And it was one of the first time I really did like statues that was not, well, it's not super dynamic. And like, I wish it was probably more dynamic, but it was what I could do with the time that I had.
Well, you got to flex some muscles there. I mean, when you're doing work like this in your free time, you love it, you know. So all the power to you. People could only dream about doing what they want to do for a living. So you're living the dream, as far as many people who are watching the show, many people who buy this stuff think. So
Okay, so we want to move on to the kind of the main topic of the show here. We got the XM Studios Darth Maul, just recently released. It's just kind of making its way out to collectors now, and Charles is lucky enough to have one on site in studio, we'll say.
Yeah. Can you post some pictures before we go to the statue?
Yeah, give me 1 second here. So do you want to show the final statue first, or?
Yeah, let's go with the final render, like full close-ups. That's fine. Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah, great shots.
What a good photographer.
Yeah. So, let me ask you something. So, how are you approached to do this piece?
So, I had done a few for XM already. I had Witchblade was not the first. I think the first one was Quicksilver, if I remember well. And Quicksilver was weird because
they wanted to do the speed effect.
They had two versions of it. They had the museum version and they had the speed effect, but it was the same character. So when I started to make the my first XM statue, was actually two statues of the same guy, and that was Quicksilver. Then that statue didn't go through. And then 2 years later, I think they asked me to do some modifications and combine some of the elements from the. There was some elements from the Sentinel that was actually more into the standing up version, the museum version, and then some of those were integrated inside the dynamic pose. But apparently that one never came out like officially. So like that piece was the first one, and I think it's never going to get released like completely. And then. There was Witchblade. There was that there's a Spider-Man that was shown, like an Iron Spider that was shown like a long time ago.
I think so. I think you might be right about that. I think that might be on hold for now.
That might be on hold, but I know there was some, it's been released in terms of, just showing some little parts of it. The background got changed like quite a few times, so I ended up not finishing that one because they wanted to change the background completely, and I think I was getting caught up with some other projects. So, and XM at some point they were like they wanted me to do some Star Wars. Oh, okay. and I had there was a few things they wanted me to do, but I ended up doing Darth Maul because I wanted to do Darth Maul anyway. And
who wouldn't, right?
Yeah.
So
did you get to choose? I mean, did you choose, or did they give you options? And
no, they gave me the Darth Maul option, but they wanted me to do like a Han Solo. Well, I don't think they ever got released, but they were talking about like the look. They were talking about other projects, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll take them all. But then I was like, okay, of course, like my priority is on Darth Maul, so I'll do Darth Maul. And if I have
why I mean Chris said that he would choose Darth Maul as well. I would too. So why what is your affinity to Darth Maul? Why did you want to choose that character?
He's most badass.
Look at him, yeah, it's awesome.
Badass.
I totally agree.
And we know now that spoiler alert, they didn't die back then, but it was like episode 1, it was the best part of it, by far. Yeah. And then he died like a bitch. And I mean, it was like anticlimactic a little bit. I mean, he killed Qui-Gon, but I don't know. There was we didn't get as much as we wanted, and after that, there was the expanded universe and all that stuff. Yeah. But there was just something about him that's just you want to know more. And
can we see some full body shots of the Darth Maul?
Well, first, I mean, I want to show these couple of shots here with some early on, without the shirt. So tell us about
it. Was never meant to have no shirt, and that's me going far and beyond the call.
It's a good take though.
I wanted to. Well, first, like for me, the best Darth Maul statue. There's a lot of really good ones. I mean, don't get me wrong, but one of the best I ever seen was the Mythos. The one that's got the shirt off.
The shirt off,
right? The sideshow.
And that one was just—it's not that it's the most resembling statue. I don't think it was the point, but it's the essence of the character. For me, it was like brutal, like the muscles, everything about it just screamed.
It looked tribal, which is what he is.
And so when I was asked to do the statue, that was the Mythos statue for me was just the pinnacle of the character. It was the roughness of the face, everything that was my inspiration.
It's interesting about the face. A lot of people don't know that his face is supposed to look flayed, like his skin had been ripped off, and that they put the black tattoos on the flayed muscle. It's really quite something. When I was reviewing this piece, I looked into Darth Maul's history and Darth Maul's background, and a lot of it isn't very well known. Mm-hmm. So, when you were putting it together, like, did you do some research looking into who he is and where he comes from? And
for sure. And I was the essence. Yeah, and I was already familiar with Ian McKay artwork.
Right.
Like, when he did the witch, which ends up being his mother in the expanded universe.
Just one quickly. Ian McKay is a guy who's largely credited with the look of Darth Maul. He's been one of the designers for Lucasfilm for George Lucas, like forever. And
I had the chance to meet him quite briefly in 2015. It was this Portugal event, like a Trojan was a unicorn. There's a lot of really amazing artists, so I had the chance just to shake his hand. But it's cool. It's like it completely changed. Like Star Wars design. I mean, there was before the episode 1, 2, and 3. Everything was like Ralph McQuarrie's him,
the original trilogy,
and Ian McKay for me. It's just two of the most influential designers. I mean, for me, there's a lot of them. I'm missing a lot of them. It's teamwork at the end, and a lot of people contributed. But
we're looking here at some preliminary pictures of the Darth Maul
and the effects,
not the final render. You really went all out. I mean, like when someone gives you a project, you really go all out. Like I see smoke effect and all sorts of extensions coming out. What happened here? How come at the end they didn't go with the shirtless, or they didn't go
Oh,
with
sure.
the smoking
Well, yeah.
effect
So,
face?
so shirtless was never meant to
Never
happen.
part of it.
So the only reason why I did the shirtless was because I wanted to have perfect and perfect as much as possible anatomy, and feeling that the clothing. Sometimes you see a statue and it's fully clothed, but it just feels like it's not necessarily filled inside like it should.
Right, right.
So I really wanted to feel like his arms, his muscles were really in the right position. So anything that was clothed would make sense because there was actually a structure underneath.
Oh, well, sure. And when you see him shirtless, you can actually have another opportunity to show how angry he is.
Oh yeah, and I like also one of the reasons I did it is I was in the back of my head I was almost hoping there was going to be a version of it,
a variant, a switch
a
out.
variant as a switch out. So that was one of the reasons I did it, and they were like, "Yeah, cool, yeah."
Well,
keep on going.
This is actually the first time XM, it's in my memory, this is the first time XM has produced a statue with no switch out at all. Like
It's
every
true.
piece that's in the box you're using.
Yeah, it's
There's
true.
nothing else in the box that's like sitting there.
And I don't remember that it was ever. It was not even part of the design. I don't remember there was going to be any switch outs. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't. It was never like going to happen.
Well, the shirtless though would have been nice though. The shirtless swap out would have been nice.
I would have loved it.
That I think just being a collector and a fan of Darth Maul, I would have appreciated that.
Well, especially because I had the mythos in mind, and he's shirtless. So I was like, exactly. I mean, that's so badass. You don't see that many statues without the shirt.
Well, I got to tell you, you don't see. This has got to be the first time I have seen a Darth Maul statue in this kind of action pose. And this is not something that we have seen. He's usually pretty much just standing there and holding the lightsaber, you know, in a resting pose almost. Whereas over here, this is a full attack pose, completely left field from everything else that we've seen. So, you know, in that regard, it's very impressive looking.
So one thing I'm interested in here is we've got some close-ups of the portrait. We mentioned the fan bases earlier in the show, and I want to, like, did you feel pressure from the Star Wars fan base here, like, to get this portrait accurate? No,
because the pressure was coming from me. I mean, to me, the face had to be brutal, and to me, it was not about necessarily to look like Ray Park. It was, and of course I had pictures of him, but it was for me to look like Darth Maul.
Right.
Like, you know, like it's not because of the actor, of course, made the character, but it goes beyond like just the actor and looking like the actor. It was just about the attitude.
Was there some concern with the approval process?
Well, it's Disney, so there was a lot of there was a lot of review and back and forth with Disney. But strangely enough, I mean, it was like, you know, flaring the nose a little more, doing this, doing that. But the problem was the time it took between the retakes. It would take months between the retakes.
Wow. Because at Disney, with Star Wars, a lot of people don't know there's like one guy that seems to be deciding all of this. So, you know, here you are, you send something in, you're very happy with it. And then, you know, they want you to make a single change. And before you get the second approval, it's 6 months. You know, and the fan base is, you know, looking on at this and they're going like, you know, the company's sleeping on the job. What's their problem? And it really isn't the case. Sometimes the approval process is the big pain in the butt aspect of it. So, you know,
but like, so the face was really the only thing that I remember like Disney being picky about. And it had to be, if I remember well, at least 80% looking like the actor. So they had like a percentage that I think it's 80% or something like that.
Chris, can you post pictures, close-ups of the face?
Yeah.
How do they gauge 80%?
Yeah, isn't that nice? 80%. I see 78.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a perception, you know. It's well, I had to match some of the photos from the episode 1. So they were sending some images, and I had to match. And you're trying to match also the perspective and everything. So and lighting, and you're trying to match it as close as possible. But with the statue, I was always trying to get the shading to at least have the black and the red, or, you know, black and white. Otherwise, it would have been almost impossible to get approved as just a statue.
So how much of this design is yours? Like, did Hive and XM present you with like a a pencil sketch of what this was supposed to look like?
Hive, they had like a fully fledged concept. I think the position on the speeder was different, and the hands weren't exactly that way. But
I'm just going to move this, Chris. Do you mind if I move the camera to the statue?
Go for it. Yeah, let's see it.
Okay, let me know what you think.
Yeah, so
you can move stuff around.
The concept was really established. Hive had like a really good rendering of him, like the attitude, everything was already there. And after that, it was more about like hands and how everything has been put together. At one point, his lightsaber was on the other side, and it was just a kind of switching, just finding the right balance for this pose. And actually, the speeder is not something that I did. I hired one of my friend, Greg Rassam, and is a really great artist. He works at Ubisoft. He's done a lot of the weapons for the Far Cry games. He's really good at hard edge, and he loves Star Wars. So I was a bit overwhelmed with all the stuff I had to do, like my daily job, like doing video games, plus doing that. So I knew I wanted to focus on effects, on the clothing, on the face, on everything, and lightsaber. And so I hired him just to do
the blood fin.
Yeah, the blood fin, and like he did an amazing job. Like the first images he sent me, like he had already had all these references that he found. So when he sent me like the first versions, it was like, yeah, that's pretty much perfect.
That's perfect.
And then I sent it to XM, and they were like, yep, okay. And that was it.
What's really good about it. Can you still hear me okay, Chris? Because I'm on the other side.
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, what I really like about it is it almost looks like it's leather seating. I mean, the crisp feel, even
your light's dropping down there.
I mean, everything looks like material.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hold it.
Sorry. So it actually looks like Corinthian leather, as they say.
Of course.
So I was very impressed by the whole overall thing. And a lot of people don't realize that this Bloodfin speeder bike is actually 18 inches long. Think about that, 18 inches long. This is a full-fledged two-piece statue. So, there are going to be some people out there receiving this who are going to be super impressed.
Yeah, I was actually surprised that it was so big. I didn't think it was going to be that big. Like in my mind, it was way smaller than that.
So, David, when you're designing this or sculpting this, do you give much consideration to the overall physical balance of the piece? Like, because Maul's kind of way out to the front. Like, do you consider how much it would tip?
Yeah, the first thing was really just to nail, like, what I learned from that Snake Eyes is that it was all about getting the pose right at first. So there was, I started with the anatomy. Well, actually, I started with the face. And then, of course, I did, the anatomy, like the shirtless version, and the legs. He had no boots. He had nothing. I just put like some basic stick in his hands just to get a placeholder. But then it was all about the pose. And then, of course, early on, the clothing is a big part of the pose. So
the movement.
Exactly. So what you want to get is the pose, and then trying to get the clothing as well. Like for that one, sometimes I don't use, and most of the time I sculpt everything from scratch. For that one, because it was dynamic, there's this software called what's it called? There's a software for clothing simulation. I'm not really good at the software, but enough just to kind of pin some fabric and then have a kind of a base, and from there sculpting the fabric. But most of the fabric ends up being redone completely in sculpture. But it's more about like getting the flow.
Now you see this. Look at the extension. The extension of the Sith robe is what gives this so much movement. This is a pouncing, leaping, very pissed off Sith Lord. So it was very cool to see, because everything had to be in motion at the same time.
Yeah, so I'm just going to throw up another of the early renders here for people to see, and we see the changes between what was on screen there and some of the early. You had a smoke effect on the base,
yeah.
And
can
then
still see the pegs, the legs of the. It's just that at some point I think it was just going to be too fragile, it would not hold, and also like the base was just getting too big. And we had this phenomenon where I was trying to put everything into a circle, and it looked like a cookie because it was kind of sand. So
Oh,
for
yeah.
the longest time, we had the cookie. Like XM was like, "Yeah, I'm not crazy about the cookies, the cookie on the floor."
Yeah.
But so what happened is like it was supposed to be smoke. Hive, the way they did it was like a big smoky thing going in the back, and like almost like the whole length of the character was going to be smoke. And I was like, XM really pushed me to do effects that I never did before. Like before XM, I didn't do any. I mean, I was never my profession to do effects, and I was like, so am I investing myself into those effects? Because that took me more time to do all the effects than doing the whole statue.
Well, when you're put in a position like that, do you find like, hey, I'm going to be challenged. I'm going to learn something new and put something else in my toolbox that I can take up next time.
But there's a lot of desperation going with it.
Well,
and you're looking at your watch, like, okay, I've been spending so much time on that effect, and that sucks. It sucks.
Hold on. Now here's the question, right? Because we ask this from artists from time to time, and okay, so the production house asks you, we want you to do this, we want you to do that, and in your head you're saying, I've never done this before, I have no idea what I'm doing, and then don't you feel this pressure to say, yeah, sure, I can do it, no problem?
Well, I mean, you always say that.
Of course.
You fake it until you make it. Is that the?
Well, that's it. You don't. You have an opportunity. How many opportunities are you going to have in a career to do Darth Maul? I mean, even comic book artists. Just as a quick aside, comic book artists are starving to do Spider-Man or X-Men. They got one shot, right? And then it's somebody else's turn. So, you get a shot, you lie. You say yes.
But yes, and the effect were a big part of the statue. And so I was desperate. I was trying all kind of combinations, sending to XM. Sometimes XM was sending me back some paint over, try this. And it looked good on paper, but when I tried it in 3D, sometimes...
Who's art directing you? Was it
Did,
Harry?
No, because at the time, maybe he started to be there. When I started to do stuff for XM, it was really the owners. There was
Brian, Ben, and Sang.
Yeah, Sang. I think Sang was mostly.
Largely.
I'm sorry if I'm being mistaken, but it was the brothers were basically running the whole thing by themselves.
Well, Sang is very hands-on when it comes to art direction. Sorry, Gina, you wanted to ask something. We keep on cutting you off.
Yeah, so David,
and Hive did some paint over. So they were given like some of the screenshots that I did, and then they were trying just to do paint overs and back and forth. Sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry. I was going to ask, when you're working on a project of this size, at the time, is it the only statue that you're working on, or are you sort of dividing your time between several projects, or do you devote all of your time to this one project?
So ideally, I want to work like just on one project, but it's almost impossible. But like most of the time, like when I do a statue, I'm trying to keep it just only one at a time. And in some cases, I have no choice, and I start something, at the same time. But I'm always like, I can't do both at the same time during the same day. So there's a few days where I will do that one. But most of the time, like if I remember well for him, it was pretty much the only thing. But I was still working full time during the day. So that was my evening and weekend pet project. And the problem with that is, I've got a family, I've got 2 kids, and
kids.
Yeah. But the thing is, I burned myself. The first time I did the statues with the sideshow Red Ninja versus Snake Eyes, I was working during the day and I was working during the night, and my kid was very young, and she was always waking up during the night, and so my nights and my days were full of work, which was fine, but at some point my body told me that it was going to be the end of it. So yeah, I burned myself up pretty good at that point. And that's a problem. You're very passionate. You want to, like, the only way you can really prove to someone that you can do statues is to actually do it. And I had the chance to do I had like Adam Ross gave me the chance to do a statue, and like sleep or no sleep, I was going to go through it and have at least one commercial project that I could say, look, I wasn't kidding, I can do this.
It's interesting. Like you were mentioning that you were first approached for Darth Maul 2015.
Yeah, it started 2015, finished in early 2016, if I remember well. And that might be extended a little bit because of the portrait. I had to go back and forth. But like the bulk of the work was 2015, if I remember well. Like for the whole character, it was all finished. For the clothing, the effect might have to be reworked a little bit in 2016. And then it was all about just the portrait.
You know, one of the... Go ahead.
Say that... I mean, the process overall was about a year, maybe?
Maybe not as much as a year, but yeah, maybe the whole thing lasted a year. But the thing is, I wasn't like for a very long time, I wasn't active on it. So because we were waiting for feedback, and I was on something else, and I was also on a new project for video game where I was doing concepts as well. Like we had a great team, so I was really happy at that point. I could really do my own concepts on. It was a Modern Combat versus. It's a mobile game, but we had like a great team, and I had the chance to also do my own concepts because like a lot. Well, I think something that you talked to Marco about, and you talked to some of the sculptor, but like of course.
Caleb.
Yeah, Caleb. Like for example, what I wish I could do is my own stuff, and I love to do stuff that exists, but also like doing my own stuff would be the ultimate stuff.
As creator owned, everybody eventually wants to do that.
But the problem with that is also it's your own stuff, and you might lack motivation because you see it and you have to push something that you create yourself, and you don't even know like maybe people's gonna like it, but I mean, you have to like it and long enough just to go through and do a whole sculpture, and you know, like. Well,
when it comes to the industry, you know, if you want it, you got to be able to take the risk of the loss of time. I just wanted to make one. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, I just want to run through some of the comments we're getting on screen here. Lots of people love the dynamic aspect of the character. They say great work there. One person asked about the texture on the cape, and you can kind of see a little bit of it in this picture here of the speeder. Charles, can you comment on the cape? Is there any texture to it, or is it pretty smooth?
You know what? I'm gonna go and touch it. Hold on. There definitely is some texture to it, and there's some layers to it. It's not the same kind of porcelain as the rest of the statue because it needs to be light. And this is something that fans need to understand, that when you're going to do a statue that has extensions like this, it has to be a lighter material so that it doesn't lean with time. So, but yes, there's definitely textures to it, layers to it, because it needs the folds to give you that feeling of movement.
Okay, so. And my friend Marco says hi to Gina. Lovely as always, Chris and Charles. He doesn't need us on the show, so.
Oh, really? Always the lovely Gina. I have actually one quick question about ZBrushing. I noticed that, you know, whenever we're looking at
that's the Canadian pronunciation, right? ZBrush. Yeah.
I'm so guilty of it.
Doesn't matter.
So. One of the things I'm noticing that, you know, you look at those digital renderings and they look so amazing. And the reason why they look so amazing is because you can put the shadowing in there. You know, the shadowing effect on this side, the shadowing effect on that side. And it looks like literally a drawing, a painting of some kind. And do you find that, you know, the link between the digital render and the final product, there's still some work that needs to be there, you know, to make it closer from A to B?
I mean, the whole conversation with photos and lighting, and it's a never-ending battle. In any medium, you can have like beautiful assets in movies. You can have beautiful assets. I mean, in collectible and video games. Like I've seen so many times, like beautiful characters that was not lit properly. You would have the skin looking orange and yellow, or having no depth to the character, or so it's this battle where what you're trying to do when you do a render of a character like that is just kind of a suggested lighting.
But hold on a second. Like when you're doing the digital render, you're doing all of that. You're doing all the lighting effects.
Yeah, the lighting in that shot is in Keyshot. So Keyshot is another software, and now for a few years now they have a bridge between the softwares. So I mean Keyshot, yeah, and it was mostly used for industrial rendering, like watches or whatever, something very like marketing. Like very clean shots. And for the past few years, they had integration where you could basically send your models inside. So you had to rework the lighting, but you had some basic stuff that was in there, and that's not in ZBrush. ZBrush is good for many things, and you can do some proper rendering and by compositing some shots, but when it comes to getting something that's realistic in terms of lighting, Keyshot, it's pretty hard to beat, because you even have some settings that you can really simulate some real lighting. Calvin and
you're learning all of this on the fly.
Kind of. Right? You don't really learn it. You just fuck around.
Oops.
Sorry.
Sorry. Quick question about Keyshot. Did you say it was originally used for like real photos and things? Like you would add lighting?
No, it was just for mostly like products, like rendering cars, rendering a toothbrush, more commercial, looking final, but usually prototyping or commercial work. It was not really used for characters that much. It was really used more for like objects and things like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you could just do all the lighting in photos digitally, that would make things a lot easier. But, yeah, so I misunderstood there. Okay. Anything left on Darth Maul?
Just one question. This is the last question I want to ask on this. So, when you look at a statue, do you feel like, like the father to a baby? Like you now get to see the final version of a year of your work. And it's now being displayed in people's homes. Like, what is that? What kind of a feeling is that for you?
I mean, it's a really good feeling for sure. The thing is, like, I get very detached from it because, like, most of the time I don't even see the final product.
You see, that sucks. But hey, you guys should know XM will be giving him a comp, so he's going to get a copy of this amazing quality. And all you companies out there, do the same. Artists deserve at least one version of their work that they spent over a year on.
So, I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, DC Collectible are really good at giving some samples. That's it.
That's it.
But so, I mean, personally, and XM, for example, I reached out not too long ago after Charles suggested that I should actually reach out, and they were super. And no, because he was like, "Why don't you have a copy?" I'm like, I don't know.
If this starts to be a trend and I'm blamed for it, that's fine. So, but I gotta say that I'm thrilled with this piece. I was very happy to receive one of these and review it. It's literally one of the nicest pieces I've ever acquired. And I want to say one other thing. I'm not a Star Wars collector. You guys don't really see the collection here. It's filled with Marvel and DC. I only have one other Star Wars piece, which is the Sideshow Biker Scout on the speeder bike. And that's the only one I kept because it was so amazing. And I would have been happy just having that one up until this one. Up until this one came out and I went, wow, this managed to break one of my collector rules, to step outside my comfort zone of Marvel and DC. It is amazing. Bravo. You did an absolutely fabulous job on it. And the fans who have this one coming are going to be thrilled with what they're getting in the mail.
Oh, thanks.
So, Gina, before we move on, anything left for Darth Maul? I know you're a big fan of the character.
No, I mean, I just want to sort of echo what Charles said. I mean, I think it's just a beautiful statue, and I hope you get to get yours soon, David, and enjoy it.
I wish I had one to give away also to Greg, because he would love having like a version. We'll see. I mean, I wish I had two copies, one for him, one for. I mean, it was not officially going through XM team, so I guess it's going to be pretty hard just to get him a copy.
All right.
So, but sorry, quickly, Marco, he's watching the show now. He's a friend of mine locally. I got to give him the gears here because he's asking about the portrait. Marco, tune in at the beginning of the show because we talked about that already. So,
Yeah, Marco, what's up?
okay, so we're gonna move on to some of your other projects that you've worked on over the years. We'll start with some.
Sorry, I'm not the same Marco.
Not the same. Not blue.
No. He's a friend of mine in Edmonton. So,
Well, hi Marco, anyway.
yeah. Okay, so we're gonna move on to some of your works with Sideshow. One thing I want to start off with here is the Batman from. I believe this is Batman vs Superman.
Yep.
Right,
movie,
Ben Affleck, Batman.
Exactly.
The Ben Affleck, Batfleck.
So the only thing that didn't follow is the metal pegs. They eventually got removed, and the cape is a material cape, but that's pretty much the final version.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing that's kind of cool about this one is we can look
Yes.
at the exploded image here. I'll call it, and
Engineering.
The engineering, you were telling us about that, some companies like XM, for example, they don't want you to do any of the engineering. Just do just do what the statue looks like. Whereas someone like Sideshow, they want you to not only do the statue, but also do the engineering as well. Like, how does that come about?
Sideshow and DC Collectible, they always want you to do the engineering. It's a blessing and it's a curse.
Well, it's more work. It seems like more work.
It's more work, but the thing is, the first time I did the engineering was for DC Collectible, and
this was another thing that you didn't have experience doing, right?
Yeah.
And you got to say that, yeah, sure, I know.
So they're giving you the contract, and the price is nice, and the character is nice, and like, oh, and engineering will be done as well, right? Like, oh,
sure,
okay,
absolutely,
sure, we'll see. No, but the thing is. Sorry.
It's okay.
I knew from the beginning that I wanted to learn this craft because if I want to do a statue for myself of my own stuff, I needed to learn that stuff. And when it's your own personal things, you already have to think about your characters. You already have to think about all those things. You don't necessarily want to go into too much technical stuff. So the fact that DC Collectible and Sideshow asked me to do the engineering, I was actually very happy that I would have to put that time to really learn
an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Presented itself.
And funny enough, it seems like a weird job, but it becomes a bit like a puzzle. And when it's well done, it's very rewarding. And it's really weird because, and also like I ended up doing the Joker that I did for DC Collectible, the Killing Joke from Bolland, like the Killing Joke.
The Brian Bolland cover.
Exactly. We'll get to that one in a second here, but
so the way I engineered it was to be something that was castable, of course, but also like how I divided it was also to be something for the painters to be able to do a job that's easier. So when you do this engineering, you're trying to do something, of course, that is going to make it physically possible to make the character, to cast it, and to be stable as much as possible. And of course to be very solid, but also like the way it's divided is also for the painting.
So how are you involved in the painting aspect, the coloring aspect? So you just do the digital render, the gray looking thing that we see on screen?
I mean, for example, like a Darth Maul or any of the XM stuff, I always did some coloring and rendering. So in that aspect, I was very involved with what it should look like. But Sideshow, for example, it's usually like I'm trying just to put black and white, like different zones where I know it's going to be darker.
You're bringing something very interesting that, there is no hard, fast rule. When someone hires you, we want you to do a statue. One company will say, we want you to do the digital render, but don't do the engineering, and we'll do the coloring. And then there's another company will say, we want you to do the engineering, but, we'll do the color. It's like there's no hard, fast rule. Right. Everyone seems to have their own way
and
of
sometimes
doing
the
it.
rendering is very important for a company because they're going to sell the product with it. And sometimes it's just because it's a suggestion and they like it. For XM, it's more of a, we're showing you something, but of course it's not they're not really selling you the product with those renders. I mean, it might spark interest, but they know it's not the final product in terms of lighting.
Do you feel that some companies give you more creative freedom than others? Is that a trick question?
Well, it really depends. Like sometimes there's a very established
way of doing things.
Yeah, and well, not just that. It's just like there's a concept that's really like Darth Maul, for example, was very close, or the intent was very close to what it ended up being. And sometimes it's very loose, or there's almost nothing. For example, like the Witchblade that I did for XM, there was nothing. There was just references, and it was like you get all those versions of her and her armor, if we can call it an armor. Yeah. And also that there's I had like a full folder that send me with butts and boobs and things like that, because you wanted something specific.
Who was asking for the butts and the boobs? We want names.
And Witchblade was very controversial.
Sang has a huge collection. I've heard. Yeah.
So. And I know some people don't like her butt, some people love it, but at some point, I mean, there's nothing you can do. It's like they chose this body type, and I was okay with it. And you know, she was different at first. The armor was a bit, but what I loved about this one is that there was no concept per se. There was just like basically do whatever, and like the pose.
Did you like that? Did you like that, having this kind of freedom, or would you prefer more direction?
No, I love it, but I love it. The problem with that is that you might end up redoing a whole lot of stuff and spending a whole lot of time. But for Witchblade, it was
in case they don't like it.
Yeah, exactly. But for Witchblade, it was really not such a big deal. It was actually a really nice process. It was not. Like for example, this twirly thing onto a Witchblade, and she's got this pair. The spare was something that was not like in any design. This is something I invented. So like no, that was fun for that for sure.
Cool, Gina, you had a question.
So so just going back to sideshow, since we're on the sideshow topic. You know, you mentioned that you also do the engineering, and I would imagine that the engineering, as you sort of described it as a puzzle, is a completely different skill set to sculpting, like the two separate skill sets. Is there an overlap in those skill sets, or I mean, did you?
Well, it's a different skill set in a sense, but I think it teaches you to become a better sculptor because you anticipate problems. So that way you actually can create a better piece, even if someone engineers it afterwards. You think about the problems, like the thickness, for example, on fabric, or certain things that might happen, and like. You know, stuff that if you knew about it, you would have done a better product, even though you're not the final person who did the engineering, or you didn't do the engineering. If you would have known about those rules, the person who did the engineering, it would have ended up being a better product because of that knowledge. So, you know, there's some people who can do like incredible engineering, I'm pretty sure, and doesn't mean that they're the best sculptor in the world. And some sculptors do their engineering, and I'm not too aware of exactly like what's going on with that. But I know for myself personally, like that's invaluable knowledge that I've learned, and I like to do it sometimes. And when I have to do it, I'm really into it. It's weird, but it's like that. But for some pieces, it's a blessing that I don't do it. Like for example, Vash the Stampede from Figurama. Boy, was I glad I didn't have to do the engineering.
Right.
Yeah. We'll show that a bit later.
That's a company that doesn't ask you to engineer.
No. But the rendering for those guys were super important because they were it was a very new. It's still a new company, but it was a very, very new company, and they needed to have like really, really nice renders. Yeah. Not just for the painting, but also just to kind of sell the product.
You know, we're looking at Gabora on screen, right? Yeah. And I have to say something, like your sculpts for your female portraits are exceptional. Oh, you know, it's very, very hard to do really nice female sculpts that, you know, where you don't lose the femininity, because we're starting to see that a little bit more where I don't want to say they're masculinizing, you know, female portraits, but, you know, there's no mistaking like the works that you've done with Gamora and Witchblade. These are very pretty looking portraits.
The Witchblade actually ended up being what has been sold is not my final portrait. I've done a different portrait than what was sold at the end. I don't know I don't know exactly what happened, but well, you know, people are super picky about the female portraits.
Well,
So
I could speak on the Gamora alone then, you know, and the
well, I mean,
Gamora,
there's some screenshots of the Witchblade where you can see like the original face, and there was like I had like a version where she was more pissed off, or she was her face was more rested. Those are very early shot that changed actually never get shown.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'll just flip back here. I had something for Witchblade. Just give me 1 second here.
but the thing is, there's what you feel is feminine, and you're trying different things, and then there's what the client thinks, you know, should happen. And so sometimes you're trying something, they want it to be someone else or looking different, and then you try your best. For Gamora, it was I mean, Sideshow are so easy to work with. I mean, for me anyway, Sideshow and DC Collectible for me are the easiest clients.
in which way would you say they're easier?
Because they kind of they it feels like they trust you, and what they show you is basically we want for example,
They know what they want. Is
yeah,
what you're saying. They know what they want.
exactly.
And they
But
you're not guessing.
but this whenever there's a change, and doesn't have, I mean, to me, my impression, maybe I'm being wrong, but my impression was that there wasn't that many retakes, and when there was a retake, it was really for good reason. They were like really, they have a sharp eye, and they know the stuff, and the others as well. But sometimes it's just there's less experimenting. Because they don't show the product, and they're not trying just to get necessarily the opinion of the collectors. They just go, this is what it's going to be. Give you know.
No, I know what you mean. Like
just do your thing, and
Yeah.
if we don't like it, we'll tell you. But usually they're super open. I mean, they're going to tell you like, this is collectible. This is this costume. We want those kind of weapons, and then we want. And usually they're very museum pose, so it's very static. So you start by the body type. You start by the very, you know, it's a bit stiffer pose, but I don't know.
Does a Sideshow give you sort of the paint scheme? Do they give you an idea of the paint scheme for some statues? So I mean, I know we were looking at Gamora. I mean, did you know that, you know, she's going to have the white sort of space outfit? Are you aware of that beforehand?
Yeah, well, there were some concept that didn't
Okay.
they didn't look anything like that at the end. Well, there was they went to have the armor concept, and they had some elements of the original costume that was more like tight. So they had the belt and the hoodie, and the skulls are more from the original comic book,
the Jim
version.
Starlin version.
Yeah. And the armor is a more recent version. So, and they didn't really take in consideration the movie was already out, like Guardians of the Galaxy was already out. So they never mentioned anything about the movie. It was not supposed to be a movie version.
This is the comic version. She's had this.
Yeah. It was a
look
comic
for a
version.
while.
Always was meant to be a comic version. The standards, like they were showing me, was some of the work from the Sideshow team, like for the hair and the face, and Will Arbottle, I think. There was some.
He also does great work.
He does amazing work, and like for me, it was kind of the standard for the hair and just this quality of work. So I was looking at that work, and it had to be, you know, looking kind of as if it was done by not the same sculptor, but you know, that could be in the same world. And I knew there was the companion pieces.
Captain Marvel,
and there was also like
Angela.
Angela. I knew Angela was going to be part of the
trilogy.
The trilogy, but well, I didn't know it was a trilogy. I didn't know I didn't know Captain Marvel was going to be part of it.
Well, that's why one is this size, one is that size, and one is that size, right? Like it's supposed to look, and they would present pictures as such.
And so for Gamora, for example, like a lot of the companies, like you don't know the pose, you have to kind of invent it. For Gamora, I think Martin Canale, and there was a lot of people involved in the concept. So he did a version of the pose. So I ended up getting the images, but I never got the model. And like Martin was like, "Why didn't you get the model?" I'm like, "I don't know." But it's actually fine, because I just wanted to know what they wanted, and I'm glad to restart everything from scratch, right? So I much prefer like pretty much all the time I do everything from scratch. And aside from the speeder for Darth Maul, which was something I wanted Greg to do. Like usually I'm pretty happy to be able to do like pretty much the whole thing by myself, if possible. I mean, I know at the end of the day, it's still, you know, it's teamwork, and there might be touch-ups, and it's going to be, you know, like people going to do the painting and engineering, all those things. I mean, there's as much or even more important than the sculpting, but like if I can do as much as possible on those pieces, I mean that's great.
Cool stuff.
So since we're on the sideshow topic, I have to ask this question. Obviously, sideshow is known for they offer exclusives or exclusive version of their statues. As the sculptor, are you made aware of this accessory is going to be the exclusive? And David, please sculpt this. So you know right from the beginning. And does Sideshow know from the very start when they talk to you, David? They're like, David, this is going to to be the exclusive. Please sculpt this knife and so forth. As
far as my experience, every time there was there was a knowledge of what it was going to be. It's not like, oh, this is what is. Well, for Gamora, it was the knife. So they didn't tell me do this knife. I just did a knife. For Batman, it was the Batarang. I knew it was going to be the Batarang. For Red Ninja versus Snake Eyes, it was the face. What was really cool about that, it was I had to design that secondary, not the visor one. I had to design that tactical mask that was a bit different. So that I loved it because that was my own design, and that was little things like that. For example, like in the sideshow Red Ninja versus Snake Eyes, the concept was very loose, and there was no there was a concept for the pose, but that was it. There was nothing about the guns, about like any of the tactical gear. So like they were like, we want to have Snake Eyes, but you need to do something more tactical than just the tight suits.
You want to see him use his weapons.
Yeah, and you had to be. I think. Like I'm not sure like when the movies came in, but it's a bit irrelevant. It just went to something to look very tactical.
Hey guys, we go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so I was going to move on to the DC Direct.
We actually talked about the Killing Joke already.
Yeah, so I'm going to show a quick render of that. So this is the Killing Joke.
Classic. We've seen like there are two versions of this, right? Like two different scales of this.
Yes. So there's the bigger scale where you see the belt is actually hanging, and the bow tie is really separated when you assemble it.
Right.
And then so that was the version I did, and I had no idea they were going to do. Well, at first I didn't know they was going to do a small version. Eventually, they asked me to do a modification of that original statue. So I got all the belts in the back because it was it's much smaller. It's like. I don't know about. I'm not in the right.
Yeah,
it's okay.
Anyway, it's small.
A 10th scale, probably.
It's super small, and so all those little things were going to break off for sure. So they just asked me to do a version where I was going just to push things in a little more. But the paint job, it's even on the smaller version, which is super small, is really really well done. I was actually super surprised. The bigger version is stellar. Like the paint job they have on the face, I don't know like how they do it. But those statues are very affordable, and like the paint job is just amazing.
It's high edition size, I think too. I think it's amazing. Like the paint applications can make or break a statue.
Oh yeah.
And it's amazing to me how sometimes you can have statues that look amazing, and then others where it just looks terrible, and it's a total downer.
So I'm going to throw up a Batman here. So this is another Brian Boland, I think, inspired. Statue. So do you find like when they ask you, hey, we want you to do a Brian Boland statue, do you like to do that because you have to model his style pretty closely, right?
Yeah, it's got to be a style. It's a challenge for sure because like Falls, the way I've done them, it's kind of how I would have done them, but at the same time it's very different from what I would have done. So like of course it's all like twirly at the end, and
that's him. That's him laughing at the Killing Joke on the last page.
Yeah,
where
he's gone crazy.
They kind of laugh together.
Oh, yeah. Well,
So David, as an artist, do you find it more challenging to do sort of this 3D sculpt of a comic book image or of a sort of a movie character? Is doing the two-dimensional comic book image more challenging?
I won't say it's more challenging, but for me, it's more fun to do a comic book version, a statue. Like the Killing Joke, it had to look like Bowen, but at the same time, there was no actor. So it's not like, oh, you have to do Ben Affleck, you have to do this, you have to do.
There's a little bit more breathing room.
Yeah, and
it doesn't have to be super lifelike.
And it's got to look like the cover, but at the same time, like I know some of my style is injected in it, and I'm super grateful because like it's like you never know what you're going to be given. You don't have like a choice. Usually, you don't really have a choice. Like for some reason, most of the time, I do villains for DC collectible and only males. I never done females. Like I'm rarely been asked to do females, and
it's just interesting.
I wish I had some more females to do. It's not by choice. It's because you're going to do villains, and the thing is, honestly, they're really interesting to do. And even if like some of the villains were not necessarily my favorite, they kind of become your babies every time because you learn. Well, first of all, you do your research, you learn all their gear and all the stuff, and then you end up really respecting that character. So even like characters that I didn't necessarily like at first, when you end up doing them, there's a kind of a respect.
You do your research.
You do your research, and then you end up having fun doing the character, so you grow a huge respect for the character. It's weird to
you know. There's something that you said. Hold on. There's something that you said that's interesting. Like I haven't been asked to do a lot of female sculpts. I'm finding in the last few years that artists are being typecast.
Oh yeah.
So Mark Newman. I'm sure a lot of people out there know who he is. Like Mark Newman would be asked to do a lot of female sculpts. Right, and
but he's done also some amazing males, and he had this whole collection of
the Court of the Dead.
Right.
Well, Court of the Dead, but before that,
he did a lot of Bowen stuff too.
Yeah.
But the point I'm trying to make, I'm not saying that they can't do other stuff.
Oh no, for sure.
But so, for example, someone is thinking, oh, I would love a Catwoman. Get Hardbottle to do it. You know, like they already go to who they think would be amazing at it. Whereas, someone like yourself, I think it'd be a pretty good choice to start doing some female sculpts because you've shown you can do it.
Well, I wish I had more to do, but that might happen eventually. I mean, of course, we're being typecasted because what end up happening is that if we're being known for a type of work and we've done it well, I mean, they're usually going to look for this type of work, so they're going to ask you for that first. And then sometimes, like even in my portfolio, I've got monsters, I've got creatures that I've done, I've got a lot of different things. And even people who ask me to do work for them, they're still surprised that I can do like females or monsters and I create all those things. I'm like, how did you find me if you don't know my work? Like, oh, well, we've sold this statue. And sometimes it's surprising that they don't go in depth.
Right.
Like just opening your portfolio and saying like, there's all those different things. And even XM, when they asked me to do work, they had no idea I was doing creatures and monsters and things like that. I'm like, dude, just open my webpage.
Yeah, well, it has a lot to do with time also.
No, of course.
I think with a lot of these producers, once they see 2 or 3 examples of your work, they're convinced that you can do the job. They don't need to see like 20 examples of your work.
Sure.
So maybe that might be one of the reasons why they might not have seen it all.
And like for people who want to do, not one type of work, but if you want to do female like statues, of course, what you need to do is to show female statues in the portfolio. Even if you haven't done them commercially, you're going to have to kind of create on your own time a proof that you can do something.
Absolutely.
So, and of course, I mean, and female is, we talked about the face, the body types. I mean, males, it's easier to do because, we have this idea of, like the hair, the muscle mass or how like, I mean, it's not necessarily right, but it's usually there's no big fuss about like how a male should look in those statues. The female body, I mean,
there's fuss.
I'm not even going there, but I mean, there's all kind of different bodies, and it's great. But they're not necessarily represented properly either.
The collector of the female sculpts, I'm not speaking for all collectors of female sculpts, but some collectors of female sculpts, they go somewhere with their thinking, and it has a different fantasy component. right? Whereas when they're looking at male sculpts, they're thinking of something heroic, something daring, something, ready for action.
Yeah.
And whereas with women, they put more pressure where it has to show all that, but has to look sexy and beautiful at the same time.
But now I still think now it's we're into an era where it's not just sexy anymore. There's sexy and strong. And,
yeah, well, that's what I'm saying.
And maybe that's where the problem comes, like with the portrait. Is sometimes they're trying to convey, she's a badass, but she's sexy. She's not, and sometimes people don't want to have like this. She looks pissed off, and of course, if she looks pissed off, she's gonna, like her jaw is gonna get a lot more square,
clenched.
Yeah. Well, I find that with like women's sculpts, it's like a lot more subjective in terms of what the community accepts. There's a lot more division when it comes to female statues. So male statues, there's a specific statue like Darth Maul. It's like, oh my God, everyone loves it. This is it. This is Darth Maul. And when it comes to sort of a female interpretation, it could be more subjective. It's just my interest. But just
also more objectifying, if we're going to be honest.
Well, it could be, but just to go in the opposite direction of work that you like to do, just to sort of ask an opposite question. Has there ever been a character that now that your career is established, has there ever been a character where you're like sort of said in a very nice way, that's not me, I'm not interested? You don't have to say what the character is or the company is,
like
but
something I would never do,
right? Like Jar Jar Binks or something. You're like, what? It's just
wow.
So my favorite
Somehow we got.
It's my favorite character.
Just so you know, she loves the Phantom.
Okay, I thought she loves Jar Jar Binks.
Do not like Jar Jar Binks. But yeah, has there ever been a character? You don't have to say the character, and you don't have to say the company, but
Jar Jar Binks.
Yeah.
Have you seen the concepts of the deaf Darth Jar Jar Binks? Anyway, like
no,
I never thought that in terms of something I don't want to do. It's usually if you're being contacted and you have the chance to do work, it's amazing to begin with. So you're super happy that someone will contact you, and like the big companies, the big studios, because let's face it, they got more money.
Right.
I've been asked many things that could be interesting as a project, but at the end of the day, $20 to do a full statue is not enough.
Right. So here, an opposite question to the one that Gina just asked: is there a character that you would love to do?
I mean, there's many characters I would love to do.
Give us the top 3 of you would love a crack at it.
That's so tough. Wow.
Oh, I stumped him.
I mean, I've been pretty happy that I was able to do characters that I care about being paid for. So I never did any fan art of Batman, but funny enough, like I've done Batman and I've got paid for it. So that's the most amazing feeling. It's something that I could have done a Batman in my free time, and that could have happened, and I got paid to do it. So that was fun. Darth Maul is probably one of the best characters. Like, I don't think at the back of my head I was like, oh, I want to do Darth Maul, but if it was pretty incredible to be able to do it. So stuff like Batman. Wolverine probably. The thing is, Wolverine, there's just so many versions of him, but of course,
but there isn't your version.
There isn't my version.
That's the way you got to look at it.
Yeah, maybe Wolverine, but I like to have a twist on it. Not, I like the Old Man Logan. I like those a bit different versions of him.
You guys hearing out there, Old Man Logan in quarter scale? I don't think there really is one out there.
Dynamic pose.
Dynamic pose.
Because I know there's one that's pretty good where it's kind of static, and it's got, who did that? Is that Bowen? Or I don't know. There's a version where
Bowen has an Old Man Logan.
It's the same pose.
That's Gentle Giant.
Gentle Giant.
Yeah.
So I think they've done really well, but they're missing the dynamic pose.
So speaking of dynamic pose, I think this would be a great segue to go into Figurama, because now you went through some dynamic poses, you went through museum poses, also sorts of different licenses. Now you're going into something that looks super busy, right? Figurama is just they have the, I don't know what the word I want to use.
Well, they're all about. Yeah, they're all about the dynamics. They want something action packed.
Yeah, absolutely.
But funny enough, it looks very crowded like that. But I think there's a shot that I sent you from above, and if you look from above, it's almost like a spiral.
I didn't put that one in actually, unfortunately, but
it's too bad. But if you go on my website, I think there's a version. I kept it because what's interesting is that the coat and all the fragments. If you look from above, it's almost like a tornado.
Oh, okay.
So well, that's good because he is that's one of his nicknames,
his nicknames,
right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But that's something that most people will never realize because they're not going to look at the piece and it's apparently pretty big.
But it just shows how much you're actually thinking about the piece when you're.
But I mean, like, those guys in terms of dynamic, it was crazy. And Giraud Singh, he was in charge of the concept. And at some point we did a Skype, and that was really helpful because like all those little elements, those debris, it was just getting very, very heavy, like all those little pieces and how everything is connected. So at some point, you've been asked, like a lot of companies, they go for, we want a character with some rubbles. So at first I was like, why everybody wants to have broken pavement and broken everything in those statues?
It's action packed. It feels like a war zone.
Sure, but so at first I was like, I don't do objects usually. I do characters. So I had to build myself a bank of destroyed parts. Debris. So now I have more parts, and I end up, sometimes I recycle some parts, I break them, I do something else with them. But at first you're like, I don't have all those things, I end up spending a lot more time, like I said, the environment and the effects and the actual characters, like the clothing, the characters, expression of those things. They're the easy part. I mean, for compared to like all those little elements and effects. But so like all the stuff that I learned from XM, environment, but also those effects. It's something that it was part of the concept. The concept was very well established.
You did this after Darth Maul.
Yes.
And that's where you kind of learned some of this flowing movement effect.
Oh, sure.
With it, so it's great. You just keep on transferring your tools to the upcoming projects and just get better at the trade.
And the effects. Okay, and the thing with the effects is that I had to redo so many things for Darth Maul and all sorts of different effects. And there's a new thing I've done for DC that hasn't been announced, and I can't wait for you guys to see it. It's going to be pretty interesting.
DC Collectibles.
Okay. And they went. It's going to be cool, I think.
Wow. Can you tell us what scale?
I have no idea what scale it is, but it's going to be cool. And it's going to be a lot of effects. And it's kind of cool because I'm not going to say what it is, but like part of the concept was amazing, but then it was not the same effects. So all the stuff that I learned from those effects and trying to push for Darth Maul, I ended up having this style that I developed. And when I showed them that effect, they were like, oh, wait, that's not... Oh, okay, we're just going to talk about it. And then they never came back. They never came back with the effect. They were like, yeah, this is it. And I was super happy because I was able to learn all those things from all those attempts, those failed attempts.
So I want to just kind of piggyback on a question that Gina had for you earlier. And, Vash Stampede, he's an anime character. He's, when you watch the series, he doesn't have this kind of detail. Is there a challenge like taking that 2D image and creating something that looks good from all angles when you don't have that source material to reference?
Yes and no, because like the important thing was just to get the secondary, the primary shape, secondary shape. So if you look at the image, like from what I'm looking at, there's no details. I mean, if you squint your eyes, you can't see any details. So like the detail came in is not very important in the whole shape and the attitude of the character. If you look at the image from far, you can't even see any of the details in the leather. But like after, when you get all that pose and all that stuff in, then for example, like on the legs, they wanted to have not just one type of leather. They wanted to have different type of grain of leather in some different areas. You might never be able to tell, and the paint job they've done is amazing. Like it's some of the best paint jobs.
Are you getting one?
Well, I can tell because
I'm supposed to get one. I don't know when, but it's part
Figurama. Good for you guys.
It's the first time that I've got a copy of the statue that's in my contract.
Wow. Yeah.
So I'm gonna have to send my address. I don't think they have it, or maybe they must have it. But they did pretty busy. So
I did see this statue at Wonder Festival last year, the winter one, but it's about a year ago now. And this is the photo I took of it. Yeah, so I definitely did notice that it had a lot of texturing, a lot of nice fine detail to it.
I mean, your eye just goes crazy with these Figurama pieces, and to me too. I mean, just
the thing with the texture and all those things. Even Shanab, which is he's a CEO of Figurama, he was like asking me, so do you think it's enough? Like, is it going to come through in terms of because when you create the statue and then it's casted, sometimes you lose like a percentage of all that detail. So like, it was really asking me, like, whatever I'm seeing in 3D right now, is it going to go through? And it was like, yeah, this is going to look about this much. And so what I did at the end is I boosted some of the, when I show the product, sometimes I show a version where I put all those things in layers in ZBrush, so I can control like if it's 100% or 80%. And so sometimes at the end, I'm gonna boost it to 120% to retain some of those details.
Well, I noticed that his jacket, it's all tattered.
Right.
So that must have been a challenge to put together, because it's got to look real tattered. It can't just be a rip here, rip there. It's got to look like a natural rip, and you have a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
So that must have taken like a lot of time to.
I started like with Bash. What I did is I made the pose right away. There was no detail, and it's a very long character, and it's not the type of characters I'm used to do in terms of proportion. So it's very skinny. So the first thing I did is the clothing. So his whole character is almost, if you look at it from far, it's all in the clothing. His clothing is the principal character, if I can say.
His jacket is very important. Yeah,
exactly. But so, like, because underneath he's like super skinny. It's like it's not even funny how skinny he is. I mean, when I built the model underneath, since I've always built the muscles underneath, I was like, this guy is gonna break,
Cool stuff.
Were you, David? Were you aware of Trigun and Vash the Stampede before you started the project?
Yeah, I mean, funny enough, it's something that I've seen like 10 years ago, like when
Me too.
When it released, and like
there you go.
And I thought the character was funny, and for the face, I had a version of the face where he was smiling. So there was alternate faces I never got released. I don't think it's ever going to get released. But there was other faces. I did like so many faces for him. And so female faces is a big thing, but anime faces is a big thing as well.
They're very, people get very picky about these. And I know Figurama did do a revision on it, on his face. Did you do the revision? Or was it somebody else?
The final revision is not from me, but it's still taken from what like
concept.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean the model that I did, they took my model and I sent so many versions of that model. It's possible that it took an older version, but even like, for example, that wasn't created on what's the vampire with all those Nazi soldiers.
Alucard.
Alucard. So I did some faces for Alucard. So some of the final faces are my faces, but I didn't put any pictures. I didn't get created, but it's okay because, it's like, I did the work I did on it is minimal. It was just I did different faces, like very pissed off and demonic. It was actually pretty cool to work on that.
So for this Vash the Stampede, because you had previous knowledge and you had watched the animated series. I guess, did that help you sort of, dive in easier to just start this project rather than, because you already had the background, I suppose.
Familiarity.
I was familiar with it, and I remember like the thing I prefer from the anime for a very long time was his weapon. His weapon influence. I did some weapon design back in the day, and I that weapon was like, for me, was it's one of his characters. Well, and there's even more. If you know the story, there's more to that weapon than just that.
Yeah.
Let's just say that way. Let's have people just look into it. And it's funny because it's kind of it's a very goofy cartoon.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you just look on the surface and you don't go beyond like the goofiness, there's actually a lot more than that into the character. So
and he had like two sides to him, right? So he sort of passed himself off as the goof, but
Yeah,
He was the most dangerous.
For sure. And I think it's also like a way for him just to, well, to disguise himself, you know, in some way,
Yeah.
you know. And also it's pretty tragic, and it would be too serious if I didn't do that way. So, and again, the cat is part of the, like, there's always like this cat somewhere. It's
Yep.
that's not even this cat. It's just there's this cat.
It just showed up.
It's always part of the show at some point, but it's nobody's cat. And I remember that I spent more time reworking the cat than the whole character. Well, it's just because it was about proportions. You know, it's like super stylized, and the way is like it's got almost no features. So it was funny because I had to go back and just rework the proportions and the features. I was like, "Are you kidding me? I'm spending so much time on this cat."
Gotta get the cat right.
But it was fine. It was part of it. You almost don't see it, like you don't even realize it's really there until you realize it's there.
Well, it sounds like you were really happy to work on this project.
Oh, Figurama was so hard to work on, but I'm super happy to have been able to be part of it. So it's like it's the hardest project that are the most rewarding, right? It was not easy.
So you would say that of all the projects that you've had in the last few years, this one was the most challenging?
That was that was one of the most challenging. Darth Maul was challenging for the effects, and for many other things, it was a different dynamic. It was actually the last statue I ever did for XM. So yeah, XM, I'm available. I don't know why we fell out of touch, but it's been until 2016. So it's been like 2-3 years. I haven't done anything for XM.
So one thing I just want to quickly ask you here before we move on. You mentioned that Vash was a challenging piece, and anime fans are very picky. I think a lot of people out there, because we had this discussion, our last show was about the statue awards, and anime stuff's kind of taking over the hobby a little bit. But a lot of people
voting like crazy.
I'm going to say a lot of the Western people that aren't into anime look at those statues and say, oh, they must be so easy, they don't have any detail, look at the faces, they're nothing to it. But I'm curious to hear from you, like, that it's actually not the case at all.
When you don't know, like, people might think stylized is easy, but it's all about the proportion. It's all about the balance, and that's some of the hardest thing to learn in statue or in general in art. It's very much about, of course, anatomy, but silhouette and balance. I mean, Marco, he talked about it, but it's the base. Like every time I had students or people that worked with me or for me or whatever, it was always about anatomy, silhouette. And even if you're not the best at anatomy, it's got to still make sense. And you have to study all the time. It's not like you stop studying anatomy. And sometimes you're doing maybe mistakes, but sometimes if you're doing mistake, but you're doing it on purpose for a good reason, it's actually okay. But when you're doing a mistake and you don't know you're doing a mistake, that's where it's not looking the best for me. Sometimes I see also some characters where things go way too far, or the muscles are not the way they should, and sometimes it's to me it just pops out as being just bad. But in some cases, I know like the body is all distorted, but in some cases it's actually part of the charm, or actually the reason why that piece is so strong. Sometimes it's just when someone knows so much about their anatomy that they know they're destroying it, but on purpose. But at the end, it just looks great. I would give an example, like Simon Lee, Spider Zero. Sorry, this guy is like an amazing sculptor, and he's really like he's doing all those statues on the fly. He's also giving courses. I wish I could get some courses from him, but he's like, when you talk about like anatomy and proportion, for me, it's like one of the best artists. Because he's really able just to play with that and just do his own thing. And I have so much. It's dynamic, but when it's not dynamic, it's amazing in museum pose. It's amazing I don't know. There's something about him. He's a genius.
Maybe we'll get him on the show.
Well, I mean, you mentioned anatomy is so important. I think human anatomy is fairly well known, right? But
even
an anime character, like let's look at like a Dragon Ball. You don't know what their head looks like from all angles, right? You kind of have to make that up and make it look good. So
actually, the people who did the Dragon Ball or those anime, they actually know what they look like. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to reproduce that. So it might seem that they don't know what they're doing, but I mean, some cases
those people do. I'm saying like
Oh yeah.
The general artist doesn't, like I don't know what the head's supposed to look like from all angles, or like people, the fans. So, I think people don't see that aspect of making those statues.
Yeah, the very specific style. Also, like the Dragon Ball, like their anatomy is a specific type of anatomy. It's not like real anatomy, but it's real enough. But okay, for example, like we're talking about Bruce Timm. Bruce Timm that did a lot of the original Batman.
Bruce Timm, the Batman Adventures.
So a lot of people think that Bruce Timm is no good in anatomy. It's actually so much the opposite. He knows so much about it that he's able to convey a shape of the Catwoman or any of the characters. He knows so much about anatomy that he's able just to convey anatomy with just a few lines. And that's where someone is a true genius at his craft, is when they're able to simplify it so much, but it still makes sense. And that's really, really hard to do. So it's like anybody who thinks that stylized is easy is because they haven't done it. Most of the time when I see a lot of heavy criticism, it's usually the best thing would be maybe don't talk about it and maybe try it for yourself. Yeah. And you'll see that maybe you'll learn some stuff, and that's maybe not that easy to do.
A lot of criticism tends to be uninformed. It's part of the business. I mean, if we were talking about the music industry, who some people think is a great guitarist, I mean, we can go on and on. Chris, I'm thinking maybe we can wrap it up in our last section.
Yeah, we're gonna move on. So you mentioned you had some exciting stuff coming for DC, so we look forward to that. But one statue that's coming out right away, I think, going up for pre-order this coming week, is a Green Lantern from Tweeterhead.
Yep. So the final one that I did some elements like the lantern. I didn't do the lantern. The effect on the ring, I did the ring, but all that effect was something different back then. The cannon, I mean, all that stuff is something I did. We're talking about it. Jack Matthews. He said he did something on it. He probably tightened up some areas. I'm not exactly sure, but the work that I did on it is pretty much. It was looking pretty much like that.
What you see is what you get.
Yeah. So I know apparently they've done some touch up, but I'm not sure exactly what. It was pretty close. The difference with that is I did a lot of effects on that one. The bass was a lot bigger. There was some twirly effects.
So now you're used to it, right?
There was some really cool version of that bass. It was pretty big and going pretty high.
What I'm saying is that, earlier you were saying, I'm not really an effects guy. And now you're turning into an effects guy. So,
sort of, but because now I understand that it's, if you're going to do that type of work, which is statue, the bass, I mean, now we see some people don't buy a statue because of the bass.
The bass can have an impact.
Exactly.
I mean, let me just as a quick aside, when XM first came in, they had these elaborate basses that people were freaking out by. Mm-hmm. They're going like, oh my God, I got to get some of this. But it ebbs and flows. There's things are hot, things are not.
Well, it's part of the character. You don't have much to. I mean, of course, like Green Lantern, so it's a construct and all that stuff. But how crazy you could get. Yeah. You could do anything
with the Green Lantern.
With the Green Lantern, it could be anything. That's like you could do like the Green Lantern could be that big, and the whole statue could be another character that is flying. That could be pretty cool.
Yeah,
actually. Yeah. To have like kind of his.
You hear that, Tweeterhead? Another Green Lantern in the works.
So Tweeterhead, I didn't. Everything was done through Jason Wire. Jason Wire has been doing a lot of the prototyping for DC Collectible. He's got his own studio where they do a lot of the printing, prototyping, and painting the statues until production. They do all that stuff. I'm not aware exactly how much they do, but they do all that stuff from when I was giving him, for example, the engineer piece for Killing Joke. Batman, he was Jason Wire and his team. He was the one who did all the prototyping.
Oh,
for
wow.
that. So I don't know like how much he does for DC Collectible anymore, but he's doing a lot of stuff for Tweeterhead.
I think he's worked on most of their DC Superpowers line for Tweeterhead. Yeah. So and a lot of it's turning out really, really well.
Tweeterhead is actually some people are free to disagree, but I think Tweeterhead should be credited in large part for the new interest, the renewed interest in this scale, because it's been largely dismissed for a while. People just wanted quarter scale. And then Tweeterhead came in, and you're going like, oh man, that's really nice, but it's smaller. But then, they started really releasing some amazing stuff, and there's a renewed interest.
It came in at the right timing. I think the timing was everything as well, because Tweeter had already started to release their 1/6 scale right when the quarter scale prices were really going up. So it was a perfect storm that they came in at the right time.
Absolutely.
I have a Tweeterhead statue. I know that Chris does as well.
Yeah.
Both of us. Chris has Joker. I have the Harlequin.
Well, I'm probably gonna order that Green Lantern. I love Green Lantern, and what Gina said
looks beautiful too.
Yeah, well, I mean, what Gina said, that the timing was everything. I wasn't gonna collect DC in 1/4 scale. I didn't have room for it. I didn't have the money for it, so I got spending money elsewhere. But I can collect this line, so I'm happy to see it. And I'm happy to hear that you worked on the Green Lantern, because I had my eye on that one for sure.
Great stuff.
And their paint job is amazing. So,
and they have a different approach. Like, you have Prime One, and Twitterhead is the opposite of Prime One, I feel, because Prime One is like, let's put some detail inside that detail. Let's just push detail so much. How can we just show more? And Twitterhead is very much about the silhouette, about, even if they're not like the crazy dynamic pose, it's very much about just right balance of the detailing. Sometimes is there, but it's made in a way where it's more about the comic book. It's, I
know exactly what you mean.
On purpose, they don't want you to do too much folds. And the other companies usually go, yeah, we're just gonna go like as if you had like a wet T-shirt on him, and it's all like lines everywhere. And sometimes like it's too much. It's nice to have some fold, but sometimes it's just like, okay, the character is not supposed to look like wet.
But I think you hit the nail on the head when you're saying they're trying to make it look more like the comic book to simplify it. But the simplifying is not a good word, because it has an image, simple.
And again, people might think it's easier, but sometimes it's actually not that easy not to add the details, because you want to add that detail, but they're like, no, you just don't add that detail there. Yeah. We're just going to keep it as it is. You're like, really? Are you sure? Okay, fine.
Yeah. So
another thing about Tweeterhead that someone mentioned here, SJ Pace, who's commenting on the show here, is that they're doing characters that you don't get anywhere else, which is nice to see. Martian Manhunter is one. Starfire, you mentioned.
Absolutely.
Wonder Woman, the
Linda Carter.
The Linda Carter version is like, wow, it's pretty amazing.
And the Starfire is based on George Perez. I mean, like, these are people that know their comics. They didn't have to model it after one of the artists, but these are fans of the genre.
Yeah. Okay. So I think nearing the end of the show here, we're going to wrap things up. So I just want to say thank you to David for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Tons of knowledge. It was great to hear all your experience about the industry. So anything, last words, Gina or Charles?
Well, I want to thank you very much for coming. It's been a pleasure having you over to the studio, and reviewing the Darth Maul with you has been a privilege. We don't really get to do this often, review a statue with the sculptor. We hope to do it more often, and thank you very much for coming. It's been great. It's been great, man.
Thank you very much.
We'll do it again soon.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Thank you
for inviting me.
Okay, thanks. So thanks everyone for watching, and we'll talk to you guys next time. Okay.
See you in a couple weeks.